Yeah, so obviously, welcome, Steve. Thanks for taking your time and coming on board. I think it's a good place to start if you could just let us know about kind of your journey so far, and what's got you to the place you are now.
Absolutely. For me, I started out in the industry about 12 years ago now, setting up my own domiciliary care provider agency, um, largely driven from a very personal and emotional space through being very ill as a child myself. Cancer and end of life and palliative care has touched my family more than you would hope or want. And it's been a catalyst for a number of my family members to come into the sector. So after spending my 20s working within an SME consulting space within financial services, it offered me the platform to set up a practice that I would be proud of and be happy for not only a member of the public but also a member of my own family to receive our services. And after growing that to be a medium-sized business operating across three counties in the Midlands, I decided that I wanted to be part of the solution within the sector and start working for larger organisations. So moving from a small organisation managing director into some management consultant and fixed term contract roles with now fairly big players like Seracare, working with them in their early years to understand how we can better support and facilitate good and outstanding care for our most vulnerable in our communities, and looking at that preventative care aspect and not forgetting that we need to put a face on every person that we support. They're not just a statistic. Really understanding what needs to sit behind that to achieve those high level outcomes and deliverables that we all want and need. And then it's been moving through different organisations and roles all the way up to board level, currently operating at a director level within a large organisation, Avery Healthcare, whereby I'm supporting people who live in our own nursing, residential and dementia care homes. And I think it's understanding that there needs to be that golden thread or common theme through the customer journey. And we often find in this sector that people are hyper focused around quality, which is a wonderful thing. And I wouldn't want people to change that. But it's really important to understand that elements of our health and social care system, whether you say that they're broken or they just don't work as efficiently as they do, there is truth to both of those arguments, and it's understanding how do we pave the way to be able to shore up and make sure that we've got a health and social care system that will be here generations after we're gone. And it's that mindset of I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. So it's really trying to come into our own around how we can be more creative and innovative, not only around using technology and new digital platforms, but how do we do that in a way that we can remove those mundane or those administrative or roles or jobs that can be taken away from the human and allow the human to do the human element with the other human that we're supporting. So that's how I've gone from being an MD of my own DCA to now working for one of the top five largest care home providers in the country. And it's been an exciting journey.
Yeah, no, that's no brilliant journey. And one of the pieces you talk about there is obviously technology. That's everywhere you turn. There's people talking about AI, technology, and how it can help with a lot of the sectors out there. In terms of how it can be used within the kind of care space, do you think that's something that providers are currently on top of? Do you think there's a journey to go? And what's your kind of experience with that at the moment?
Um, there's great benefit to it. I don't think the majority of providers out there are anywhere near where we would want them or hope them to be. And there is a very simple reason for that. Cost is a huge element. When you look at the 10,000 plus providers in England alone, and they're usually sole owner operator providers, whether they're offering community based services or even where they're offering more place-based and residential services or even supported living. The market's so fragmented because the majority of them aren't part of a collective. So it makes it very difficult for us to streamline the system. And I appreciate that we don't want to streamline the system to the point where it's restrictive and it's not functional and it's not providing any real choice for either the provider or indeed the end user, the customer, the vulnerable individual as well. But I think we need to really understand where does that line need to be, and we can't have a dip your toe in and pull it back out again. We kind of need a bit of an all or nothing approach whereby we can safeguard that choice aspect, but we need to be a bit more structured and streamline our approach. And that's across all local authorities, all trusts, ICBs. I think we need some help from central government as well, so that we can enable providers to set that expectation and give them one clear vision or one version of Nirvana, if you like, around what are we aiming for, how are we going to achieve it, rather than at the moment we've got the expectations from CQC. Then if you're contracting with a local authority, a trust as well as an ICB, you've got multiple masters to service, and it's not a reasonable expectation for either digital platform providers who are offering services to healthcare service providers and to be everything to everyone. It's not financially sustainable. So we just need to understand what does that journey or what does that version of Nirvana look like. And I think once we've achieved that, it will help shape what the next steps look like as well. I'm a real fan of AI technology and digital platforms, not only in that functional, practical way, but also it's looking at, well, how can we tee up that preventative care? So one of my roles previously was working with a company where we developed really sophisticated AI software to alert us of a respiratory infection so that we can catch it in that first 24, 48-hour period. Because we know that if it hits 72 hours, the likely event is the majority of those people are going to have a significant event at home. They will be hospitalised for either intravenous antibiotics and or could have a life-changing event, usually a head injury through a fall. And we then know that the majority of the 65 plus market, you go into hospital with that type of fall, it reduces your life expectancy to 1.3 years. That's not only a horrible event to a loved one that we could have changed, it's also a massive cost on already a cash-strapped system. So I think it's understanding how can we adapt and use that technology to our most efficient. And also it's that hearts and minds piece. And I'll give you an example. A London-based borough was talking to him about preventative AI, wasn't following me at all. 25 minutes into a call, he made a comment, oh, is this a bit like Skynet? The product manager and the CEO didn't have a clue where the Terminator reference was coming from. I did and clocked it straight away. That was it. It all of a sudden made complete sense to him. And I think when we use these terms like assistive technology, a mobile phone is assistive technology. We've been using them for decades now, but we change that wording, and that narrative and that mindset automatically changes, but it doesn't need to be. So I think it's just to help keeping it simple, because then the 65 plus market, they're very clever, very astute, with technology that was starting 20, 30 years ago. They were the same age that I am now. So they've been using it for 20 or 30 years. But when we're trying to mix it up and make it clever and reinvent the wheel, you lose them. And then they just don't want to get involved and they disengage because it's like, nah, can't be asked for that. So it's just trying to strike that balance. But yeah, I think there's a lot of promise for it. We just need to understand what are we actually aiming for and how we're going to get there.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think it's, within the recruitment sector, there's lots of technology and AI you can use, but I think it's a lot of it needs to be around the education of it, what the benefits are, and what that really means. Because as you said, people got different terminologies, and I don't think it needs to be as complicated as sometimes it's made out to be. So a big piece of education around that would be super beneficial. And I think, as you touched on as well, especially within the care sector, there's lots of different pieces of the puzzle, and this, how can you link them all together as a real bit of collaboration to get to the end goal, which I think needs to be fixed, where it often moves depending on budgets. Where ultimately the end goal needs to remain the same, but how you get there might need to alter depending on circumstances. But yeah, no, that's a really fair point. And I think as we touched off camera, um, around the current market at the moment, you go on Mo's News, Sky News, BBC News, you name it. It's very doom and gloom. There's a lot of negative press around funding, services, CQC, you kind of name it. There's a lot of negative press, and there's not much positive. However, part of my role is speaking to directors, hiring managers, CEOs, and there's hundreds of positive stories out there. What's your stance on that?
I completely agree with you. It's a real shame. We we are intrinsically involved on a very human and basic level with other humans to be able to help support them through some of the most traumatic and harrowing periods of their life. And also, that end of life and palliative care piece, whether that's in a hospice, a care home setting, or in someone's home. And I think emotionally there is a real privilege there that we often forget or we try not to think about because it's not a nice emotional place to go to. Having said that, it's a reality of life. And I mean, I've been doing it for over 10 years now. Um, People, when they're of a certain age or when they've got a certain diagnosis, they need to talk about it and they need to think about the, the, the end, and there's no nice way to dress that up. And then there's all the functional things that go around that as well. So when I've run job fairs in the past, wiping bums is usually the first myth buster that you have as a carer. I mean, I started out wearing a tunic. I'll still throw on a tunic at times now if I need to, and I really enjoy when I get the opportunity visiting the homes that I manage now in my current role. I love being able to go and spend a few hours on the different communities, whether that's now residential or our nursing, or I have the most fun in our dementia units and our memory care units, just because it gives me the opportunity and the time to go and spend time with the residents and talk to people. Um, I mean, I'm a people person anyway. I really enjoy that part of my job, and that's what gets me up and makes me go to work every day because you get to make a difference. And I think by so doing, it's the opportunity that it can give you along the way. So, if we look back 30, 40 years ago, to be able to be successful in an industry, there was a very rigid and structured approach. So if you look at nursing or wanting to become a doctor or another form of clinical role within the health and social care setting, it was a case of good A levels, go to uni, get your degree, get your PhD or whatever the specialism is, and then you go off and do the job. Whereas now, I think we've changed our attitude to education and what that needs to look like, which is a really positive thing. Um, I had a plan in my late teens that I would go off to uni and do this, that, and the other, and I ended up deciding I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to go away, and I didn't want to spend another 4 or 5 years in an education setting. I'd had enough at 19. And I then decided in my mid 20s that I would eventually come into the health and social care field because that's what I loved and enjoyed doing. And all of my qualifications at a degree up to a master's level to now has been in the health and social care setting. And I'll be signing up for my MBA over the next 2 or 3 months within the health and social care setting, and I'll even look at some form of doctorate after that. So this industry that isn't often dressed up, and it's minimum wage. There's no career. It's complete nonsense, and I think it's a real shame that we don't get to shout about the great and the good that we do. And also another small example. I think it was last year or the year before when we were coming out of COVID. I remember seeing on the news a short piece about Wolverhampton NHS Trust or ICB, which is only about half an hour, 40 minutes away from me. And due to the changes that we had to make throughout COVID, they had to lean into technology practices, and they'd set up this virtual triaging and clinic practice within the hospital. And unfortunately, it got a really negative angle when it was put on TV. But I thought it was a fantastic thing that the trust should be really proud of. They've innovated and they've adapted to serve their local community. And why we aren't jumping up and down praising them for it, I just don't know. And I think it's because we always come back to, well, it's about funding or it's about pay. And I think it's one of those industries, very much like teaching, or if you're working as a civil servant, there is an element of vocation to this industry and this role that you have. And whilst you can get high up later on in your career to that senior exec level and earn a nice pay packet, there's also a lot of experience that you rightly should get as you go. So for me, I don't think it's realistic for anyone to go to university and get up to a PhD level and automatically think that, right, I deserve that job and that pay packet that goes with it. Because if you've not got that hands-on experience, regardless of the industry, why is my first answer. And I'm sure many people wouldn't like that, but I think it's true. You need to walk a day in people's shoes. And for me, I've done many years operating as a carer or a carer or a HCA, and I love it. And I'm very happy to go back to it and muck in and help and spend the time at the coal face, if you like. And I think it's important that I do, and everyone at my level and higher, I believe they should, because it gives you that reality check, that you know what's happening at the service delivery end. You know what your frontline staff are feeling. You know what your residents or your customers are feeling, and you can get it firsthand, so that you know that if something's got to change, you really understand why. And I think any senior leader in this day and age now that thinks that they shouldn't or haven't got their hands dirty, I don't think they should be in the role, because you need to understand what you're delivering at a very granular level.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think it doesn't matter how far you move up the ladder. I think, the best leaders out there are the ones that step back in to the shoes of those on the front line, whether that be quarterly, monthly, a few times a year. It doesn't, it depends on the exact role, I guess. But, it's important to take that step back and, and see what's actually happening, because times change. And I think, you only really understand that once you're in there living and breathing it day in, day out. Um, so, so obviously, that's exactly what you said. So there's so much positive out there, and it doesn't get shouted about nearly as much as it should. Um, from your experience, is there something providers could do more about kind of selling the dream in a way? There's a lot of press at the moment about staffing and retention, and finding it hard to recruit. But is there more that providers can do to kind of get people on board?
Um, yeah, I think you kind of need to break it down and look at a multiple approach with it. So, I mean, from an adult health and social care space now, you've got an awful lot of support there from Skills for Care, and they can really provide a nice, clear, succinct journey. Um, out the room, please. They can give a real clear, succinct career pathway of what that looks like at an entry level, getting your level two QCF all the way up to your level seven. What sort of jobs that level of qualification would give you as you go, and also it helps putting on potential earnings and all that sort of stuff, because it gives people a clear vision, and then also it's looking at that local piece as well of what you can tap into. So when I had my own business, or regardless of any role that I've ever been in, I've always wanted to get links with our local community organisations, working with your local job shops and job centres, so that you can build up your own branding to be that employer and provider of choice. Because I think they go hand in hand in most sectors, but especially in this one. If you've got a happy engaged, thoughtful team, that's what will draw other people in. It will keep people here as well. And then also, it's not forgetting the fact of when you're managing and working with people. Um, you can't do that like you used to in the 80s and 90s, not least because ACAS kind of won't let you do that anymore. But also, um, taking a very bombastic, authoritarian, autocratic approach to people now, it's just not going to work. Um, the last 4 or 5 years, as I've had different roles, some have been contracted and some have been permanent. I've I've always got high engagement really quickly, and it's enabled me to get the results that I've needed to get very quickly, and that's purely been down to me and my personality and my approach. I've been micromanaged. I've been managed like that in the past, and I hated it.
Haven't
So
we
for
all?
me now, yeah, yeah. So it's thinking, well, I don't want to be like that. It's like parenting. So often you just like, I'd never be like that if I become a parent, and then you hear yourself, well, I've turned into that, but then you want to put your own spin on it. And I think it's the same when you're a manager and a leader, and it's kind of understanding the difference between those two roles as well, in order to not just attract but then keep people. And it's you know a manager is a very functional role, in its essence, and then a leader, it's something completely different. You've got to get that buy-in. You've got to take people on a journey with you, and you've got to want to do that as well. And I think the moment that you lose that passion or want or desire in any role that you're in, it has an immediate effect on your team. And I think that's one thing in the industry that we need to be really mindful of, because everyone's so fearful. You make a mistake, it could have a serious impact on people around you. And if you're not being paid a great amount of money, they're just going to think, well, I'll go to Tesco or Aldi, I can get paid 2 or 3 quid more an hour. And if I break some product, it's not the end of the world. If I keep on doing it, then my manager's not going to be happy with me. But if I make an accident at work in this industry, they just think, well, God, am I going to get prosecuted, or am I going to go to jail, or what would need to be depending on the outcome? And I think because as an industry, we've changed our approach as well and softened it slightly, which I think is the right thing to do. It's also making sure that we just don't lose sight of we are dealing with some of the most vulnerable people within our society, and they deserve that level of respect and attention for the stuff we're delivering for them. But it's also not to take away that we're all human, and I've made meds errors in the past. I've never had a moving and handling issue where anyone's ever got injured for something like that, because I'm a trainer in it for 15 years. So I think I'd get absolutely roasted. But it's looking at it on a case by case basis of you're a human, and we're not taking that away. We don't expect you to be 100% of the time. And it's also a bit of a rule of thumb. I always say to people, I take my job seriously. I don't take myself too seriously, because we spend a lot of time at work. We need to have a laugh and a joke and enjoy our time and have some fun along the way. And it's making sure that that premise goes through the work that we do, so that if we do get something wrong, we own up to it and we learn from it. And I think it's all those smaller pieces that drives that culture in an organisation. So I think that culture piece is the biggest one now, not only because as a society, that's where we've moved on to, where that's one of the biggest contributing factors to why we would want to choose to go to a certain provider or employer, and of course stay there as well. It's making sure that we've got a purpose. The money needs to be right to a point, but if you're not happy in the job that you're doing and the people that you're working with, then all the money in the world's not going to keep you there. And it's kind of understanding that as well, and making the real change that you sometimes need to, even if you don't want to.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's spot on. And it works both ways. Like you said, the money side, the culture side, and that's where, you get a regional manager, regional director, the registered manager, they've got to group together to create that culture, that allows people to thrive, because that's only going to benefit the residents that are the ones who are most important in this. And, some of these services, residents pay an awful lot of money on a weekly basis, that they deserve the right care. And yeah, that's a fundamental, it's you're going in there for one reason only, and that is to provide the best quality care for the people in the homes. And obviously, talking about pay, over the next couple of days, as we move further into April, the minimum wage is due to be increased, which is one of the biggest, if not the biggest increase there has been, is that of course it's a positive, especially with the cost of living and stuff like that. But is that gonna are providers ready for that sort of increase? Um, is there a different way? Is there different structures that maybe should be implemented to support that further? And where's your stance on that? As I'm sure, as in your role, that's something that you guys have obviously had to look at over the last few months.
It is. I don't think a lot of providers are going to be ready for it. And I think it's a real shame. And it's not through fault of their own. I think the problem that we've got is we've got a percentage uplift that is not being met by the fees that are being paid, often by local authorities, NHS trusts, and ICBs. So we're going through a real crunch point, I think. And if it's not met, then the service doesn't become sustainable. And eventually, the people are going to be out of the job that might have been there for months or years. And then, more importantly, as well, the service users or the customers or the residents, they're then going to be without a provider. So you then just put more pressure on another provider that's needing to pick up the slack. And I think that's the bit that's being forgotten about. Of course, they're big numbers, um, but they're not being viewed in the same light as a provider. Now, I've always had many debates, shall we say, with ICBs, trusts, and local authorities over the years. And when I did some management consultancy work, only 3.5 years ago, um, we picked a borough in London, and it was one of the more affluent boroughs as well. And we just said, right, if you were to take your Swift or council run service that you used to do 20 years ago, repriced it into the market now, and went back out there, what would your hourly rate be? Um, After doing that work, it came out at about £80 an hour. And I was like, right, you're going to market for providers at about £20 an hour, and you want good and outstanding care. How? You want retention and to be a vital cog of that local economy and infrastructure to be able to provide homes and keep everything moving forward and provide services to citizens in your borough. I was like, and you're operating at a quarter of what it would cost you to put it back out there. And it's a case of meet them part way then, take it up another £10 an hour. And it's like, oh no, we couldn't possibly do that. And it's a case of, well, if you, I'm not going to use a phrase that my parents would have used, but if you're going to pay that, you're going to get what you get. And you're just having that reality check that I don't think is there. But then it's a case of, if we don't fix the base problem of good preventative care and then care that is needed and it's not being delivered at a good or an outstanding level, you've got a load of other services that will naturally flow from it. And then it's looking at the whole um, government cycle, whether it's local or central government. Um, they both have different rules and autonomies to operate as they wish, and it's the same for the trust, the ICBs. And it's always very interesting how the book always moves. So the local government will say it's central government's fault, or they'll then say it's the NHS or the ICB, and then all three of them will then go back to central government and just think, well, you've all had massive increases and you're just not spending it very well, and you're not looking at ways that you can collaborate with those community-based services. I mean, I've got a few personal views on it. One of them really sits with when care at home was taken off the NHS 20 odd years ago. They just haven't got over it still, and it's a case of there is this them and us attitude that we desperately need it to be fixed and mended and come back to the table and work collaboratively, and then look at that funding pot as a whole and be realistic with it, because it always seems and feels like, well, the private providers, they're the poor relation that will pick up the slack. And you just think, well, actually, we're getting to such a degree now where no, we won't. Um, my current employer, we are a luxury end private provider. We will help important we do contract with ICBs and trusts and local authorities. But at the end of the day, we're a private provider. And if we need to move more towards privately paying residents and have to start moving away from local authority and ICB and trust funded residents, then we have to have that balance and we have to have it be financially sustainable, but you can't move completely into one because they're just not prepared to pay the money. And then when you flip it, it's a case of, well, we couldn't possibly take it back in house because it would cost us so much money. Well, then something's got to give. And I just think they need to be really realistic around their approach, how they're spending money. Um, it's got to change. And I don't welcome some of those senior local and central government and NHS people who've got to manage these big budgets. But there's clearly an issue with how the money's being spent and how and where it's being spent. So I think some stats that I read a few years ago within some of the hospitals in the Midlands, they were nearly 50-50 around clinical and administrative functions within a hospital. I mean, even 60% clinical and 40% administrative. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. Why on earth is 40% of your revenue walking out the door for, don't mean to cause any offence, but for pen pushing roles when you're offering a clinical service in a hospital? That is way off. And that percentage divide is way off. I think it's a case of people don't want to have a difficult conversation as well because it'll put their jobs at risk. But it's a case of, well, where do we get to? Do we get to a catastrophic event that was completely avoidable until we're going to wake up to it? And that's sometimes the worry. And whilst I wouldn't name any local authorities or trusts or central government departments that I've worked with previously, I've been that coarse and blunt with people in the past because you do sit there and wonder at times, well, you spend seven figures on some posh management consultants to come in and fix some work that you won't even fully engage with and roll out. You've just ticked a box to say that you've tried. I mean, it's public money. You shouldn't be allowed to do it. And I understand that they've got a lot of artistic license within that. But I just think we need to do better. We all need to do better and try harder. And I think sometimes that's forgotten because it's such a big beast, whether it's local government, central government, or an NHS trust. They can all operate in their own right, in their own little organisation, well, their own organisations, depending on where they are around the country. And I think it's very easy for them to become fragmented within their own little market of four. So that naturally just echoes out to the rest of us. And I don't think it's necessarily intentional either. It's because a lot of it's a bureaucratic way and a way that we've done things for many years. So it's really difficult to even change that. And it can be really difficult and really challenging for someone to put their head above the parapet and say, hold on a minute, we need to do this differently and we need to make drastic action now. And sometimes I wonder, have we tried things that take us through a lot of pain for long enough to see if they're actually going to work? Or do we try it for 6 or 12 months and think, oh, yeah, I've had enough pain or uncomfortableness now. I don't want to try it for 3 years. I think we should just give up now or try something new or say that it just didn't work. But then even when we do that, do we actually pick it all apart and say, well, 70% of it worked. So do we keep 70% into place and then start looking at the other 30% that needs fixing? Because the whole system isn't broken. Parts of it aren't working as efficiently as they need to. I think that's the wider piece of work. And it's difficult because everyone, providers, local, central government, trusts, ICBs, we all need to do that reflective practice. And it's difficult because no one wants to look at themselves in the mirror and say, you ain't doing a good enough job and you need to change, because no one likes criticism like that. So,
And I think, you've hit the nail on the head, really. And I think it comes down to that. It all comes down to that collaboration piece and communication. Everyone at the moment, there's a lot of different sides doing their own thing where, which is fine, but you all need to be pulling in the right direction. But until I think, as you said, until you give something a go and then you pick it apart and decide what's worked, what hasn't worked, and just fix things slowly. I think there's been a lot of commonplace where that hasn't worked, let's try something else. And then let's try something else and let's try something else. Where actually, I think, it's not broken of such. It just there needs to be tweaks and there needs to be little bits changed to actually allow it to work in a much better way. Because at the end of the day, in the middle of all of this, like you said, the most vulnerable people in the UK that need support, and there's still, a high number of people missing out on this support because I don't think that collaboration and communication is as good as it can be. And that's where we need to really drive home, where what this, where we are currently, and how we're going to get to where we need to get to in the future.
It's that whole magpie mentality of it's the new shiny thing, it's the new shiny thing, so let's go to the new shiny thing. And look, at the end of the day, I'm quite opinionated about this and I'm quite direct. And nobody comes into this industry because they want to do a bad job. Look, and we've all had moments at the end of the day, regardless whether we're working for local or central governments, trusts, ICBs, or private providers. We've all tried something, it's not completely worked out, and we've had to figure out why and fix it. And I think that's just where we are. We've been through, I mean, COVID, it was something that I never expected to happen in my lifetime. Never in a million years. It was like something out of Contagion that you've watched on DVD 10 years ago. You didn't expect this to happen in real life, but it did. And it's a case of, regardless of your political prowess, I wouldn't have wanted that job for all the money in the world to be in charge of the country that I live in and to have to make some of those decisions. I wouldn't have wanted that. And all of our world leaders, it's easy for us to look back on retrospectively and say, you got that wrong. You should have done something different. But it was territory that none of us had planned for, none of us have experienced, so we didn't know how to navigate our way through. And fine, touch wood, we don't want it to happen again. But if it did happen again, we've got the science to maybe do it a bit better. And I think that's it. I think it's there's an American lady, something Brown, and she's wrote a book about dropping the egos when you enter the room to just have a really open and frank conversation. And I think, do you know what? Yeah, yeah. But because at the end of the day, it's not that we're finger pointing. It's a case of something's got to give, and we just need to figure out what it is. And it's a case of we then need to all put our hands to it to try and fix it. It's not a case of it's your department, it's your problem. It's a case of the problem sat here. How do we fix it? What can we all do? And I think it's that collaborative approach. I mean, I loved some of the work that I've done over the years, especially in that management consultancy world. Some of it really rubbed me up the wrong way, but some of it I absolutely loved because I got to sit around the table with some amazing people as clients and with so much knowledge and so much passion and so much thought of how we can make something fantastic for not only the people that work within the organisation, but the people who are receiving the service. And I love leaning on the strengths and the knowledge for the people in the room. I mean, I would hate to be sat in a room of another 10 of me, not because we'll be fighting for the attention, but it's a case of I'd get from it. And I think that's the wonderful thing. And that's why I love open debate about anything. And I know that's not always the done thing nowadays because we're worried of offending everyone. But I would rather have a really frank and open dialogue with anyone to just get it all out there so we can figure it out. Because if everyone's there and truths, you're never going to get anywhere.
For sure, and that's how you get things done, right? I think you got to find out what the problem is, and then you've got to be open about what the solutions are. And I think touched on, you mentioned COVID and a few other things, and I think we're very quick to talk about the negatives, but not and use COVID for example. It was all very negative. We didn't do that right. We didn't do this right, but we didn't talk about all the positives and yet again all the success stories that there were, and people that were working 60, 70, 80, 90-hour weeks. It's all, and I think you've got to build on the positives. What did we do right? And yet it's actually, how can we do more of that? And what didn't go quite right? what could we tweak? Because it's a lot of it is small tweaks. It doesn't need to change. It don't need to change massively. And I think with that and the collaboration and just more open communication about what's realistic. There's a lot of positives over the next few years to see in this space. And I guess we'll have a few more minutes. And I think in terms of, I guess it's good to use this as not a pitch, but how you know use Avery for example. You'll have vacancies. Why should people come and join the health and social care sector? What kind of people is this sector looking out for, and what people would do you think that would be?
I mean, for me, it hasn't always been a values based recruitment approach. Look, I can teach anyone the mechanics. I can teach them how to use equipment. I can teach them how to write care plans and write, you know, notes and all that sort of stuff. I can teach you all the functional stuff, and that's absolutely fine because there is a standard at Avery that we expect, and and we as a company and me as a regional director, I won't budge on it. And I shouldn't budge on it, and neither do my colleagues either. We expect that level for a reason. Um, I want people that like being around people, that care about other people, that want to spend some time and improve someone's quality of life. Because if you don't like spending your time with other humans and getting on with them and making them laugh and making them smile and getting involved, then it's probably not the right employer or indeed industry for you. Um, I've always laughed and joked at this, and I do have some techie friends, so they do normally take this with the tongue in cheek and the smile intention that it is. If you don't like people, go and be a data analyst in a basement somewhere, and that's normally what I've said, and that's just me being my usual self with people who are a bit grumpy with me. But it's a case of I want to work around people that I get. From an emotional point of view, we all have our good and our bad days. We've got to put that to a point at the door before we come into work. That's just normal for everyone. And I think that's just a reality of life. Having said that, we again we need to and want to be around people. And if you can do that, then that's a great thing. And if you can't, then I don't know. Some providers might want that, but for me, I want people who care about other people and they want to put a smile on someone's face. Because some of the tasks that we do, especially around personal care, look, us as deliverers of that care service, that's not a great part of the job or a part of the job that most people I know they've ever said that they really enjoy, but it's a part of the job. And the whole point of whilst we're doing that is to try and take somebody's mind off the fact of, functionally and mechanically, they can't manage their own personal care anymore. So they need support. And I think for me, it was really telling. A number of years ago, we supported a chap who had Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and he came to us when he was 16, and I went out of my way because I was normally the one that was involved in delivering his care for the majority of the time that we had him with us. Um, I always made sure that I would wear something or talk about something. I'd talk about all sorts of nonsense just to take his mind off it. And when we were going in to support him first thing in the morning, getting up and washed and showered and dressed, and then when we go out and do things, when he was back home from school and going to the cinema and going out for lunch. All these are these normal things that we normally do. And it's just thinking, well, how can I do that to take his mind off the functional stuff that we have to do that isn't nice for a teenager to be having. My colleagues were normally the north side of 40 or 50 and female, or he had somebody in his early 30s, a guy helping him. So putting myself in his shoes, I've kind of been there anyway as a kid because I was poorly as a kid, so I really get it. It ain't nice, and I think it's trying to help distract people and make them not think about it in that moment. And talking and distraction is your best friend in this industry because you take somebody's mind off. the most difficult bit, because from a dignity point of view, whilst we're trying to maintain it as best as we can for somebody, it's gone out the window because they need somebody to help them with their own personal care. So I think it's normally thinking about things like that. Of how would you feel in that person's shoes? What would you want to be done if that was you? And I think because I've been on the receiving end of care in the past when I've had major operations and not been able to do everything myself, I really get it. And I think it's all those bits and pieces that kind of really feed into why you want the team that you've got around you, and why you want that type of person who can and will and is able to be able to support somebody in that moment, because it's a really vulnerable place to be.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. And it's such, yeah, like you said, it's all about the compassion. People wanna have to be there, help people. And it's, of course you're going to have some lows, but the highs are so powerful, and I think you can make such an important difference to those that need it the most. It can be a really satisfying industry. And I know myself and my colleague Ben love recruiting into this space for that reason. You can get some real cool people that care so much into some really great jobs that actually, this makes a massive, massive difference. So no, that's brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Steve. It's been an absolute pleasure. And we will catch up soon.